The BRICS nations are calling for reforms to better reflect the economic realities of the 21st century, arguing that the current structures of the IMF and WTO unfairly favor wealthier countries and fail to adequately address the needs of the global south. Their demands include reforming the IMF's quota system to give emerging economies greater influence and restoring the full capacity of the WTO's dispute settlement system. As a result, the global south is pushing for an overhaul of the current Western-centric financial system and is even exploring the creation of alternative institutions to serve its needs. In this video, we explore the widespread dissatisfaction with the IMF, examining the negative effects of IMF-backed loans in several global south nations, where they have had disastrous consequences for both citizens and economies. Let's begin with Brazil. When Brazil faced a severe economic crisis in the late 1990s, it turned to the IMF for assistance in stabilizing its currency and economy. In November 1998, the IMF approved a massive $41.5 billion bailout, conditional on Brazil implementing harsh austerity measures and structural reforms aimed at reducing fiscal deficits and improving economic stability. These measures included significant cuts in public spending, higher taxes, and public sector reforms. As a result, essential services like healthcare, education, and social security were heavily reduced, affecting vulnerable groups the most. Public outrage grew as citizens and labor unions blamed the IMF for worsening poverty and inequality, leading to widespread protests and strikes. Critics argued that the IMF's focus on fiscal austerity hindered economic growth and social progress, driving up unemployment and unrest. However, some believe these reforms were essential for Brazil's long-term stability, helping curb hyperinflation and restore investor confidence. Brazil's early repayment of its IMF loans in 2005, under President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, is often seen as a sign of regained financial sovereignty. The debate continues, however, about whether the social costs of these policies were worth the economic stability they provided. Next, we turn to Indonesia. During the Asian financial crisis of the late 1990s, Indonesia was hit hard by currency devaluation, soaring inflation, and economic instability. In October 1997, President Suharto's government secured a $43 billion IMF bailout, which came with austerity conditions. These policies sparked massive public outrage, leading to nationwide protests and violent riots in Jakarta and other cities. The violence, which targeted symbols of wealth, including the Chinese-Indonesian community, led to numerous deaths and eventually forced Suharto to resign in May 1998 after 31 years in power. The 1998 crisis marked the beginning of Indonesia's reformasi era, which brought democratic reforms and more openness in government. However, the IMF's austerity measures left a lasting negative impact on Indonesian society, shaping public opinion on international financial organizations for years to come. In Egypt, the 1977 bread riots were a direct result of government measures to cut food subsidies in exchange for IMF support. The subsidy cuts led to steep price hikes for basic staples like bread, sugar, rice, and cooking oil. This sparked widespread protests across major cities, including Cairo, Alexandria, and Suez. On January 20, 1977, President Anwar Sadat deployed the military to restore order, resulting in around 80 deaths and over 550 injuries. The government was forced to reverse its decision and reinstate the subsidies, thus defusing the crisis. However, the episode highlighted the social tensions caused by austerity measures in a country that heavily relied on subsidized goods. In Morocco, the government faced economic difficulties in the 1980s, including rising debt and budget deficits. In 1981, King Hassan II's government agreed to IMF-backed austerity measures, which included withdrawing subsidies on vital food items. Prices for items like flour, sugar, and oil skyrocketed, sparking widespread protests known as the Casablanca bread riots. The government's swift and brutal response, including police and military intervention, led to a high death toll, with estimates ranging from 66 to 637. The incident demonstrated the dangers of implementing austerity measures in societies reliant on subsidies and the friction between international financial institutions and local socio-economic realities. In Nigeria, a severe economic downturn in the 1980s, exacerbated by falling oil revenues, led the government to implement a structural adjustment program with IMF backing. The devaluation of the currency and the removal of subsidies led to higher living costs for Nigerians, with inflation increasing and public dissatisfaction growing. Protests, particularly the anti-SAP riots of 1989, spread across the country as students, workers, and citizens voiced their anger at the economic hardships. The government's military response to the protests further destabilized the political environment, and while some argue that the IMF's reforms were necessary for Nigeria's long-term economic health, the immediate social and political costs were significant. In Venezuela, a sharp decline in oil revenues and increasing external debt led to severe economic crisis in 1989. President Carlos Andrés Pérez introduced IMF-backed austerity measures, including the elimination of fuel subsidies. The abrupt price hikes sparked the 1989 El Caracazo riots in Caracas, which saw widespread looting and violent clashes with government forces. The military crackdown led to the deaths of hundreds, with some estimates suggesting as many as 2,000 to 5,000 deaths. The crisis and the violent response led to a loss of public trust in traditional politics and created fertile ground for the rise of Hugo Chavez. In 1992, a lieutenant colonel's attempt to stage a coup failed, but he capitalized on widespread public discontent, ultimately winning the presidency in 1998. This period marked a critical moment in Venezuelan history, highlighting significant societal divisions and the volatile effects of sudden economic changes. Since 1988, Venezuela has seen economic upheavals, with political unrest escalating due to adjustments imposed by global financial institutions. Similarly, Pakistan has consistently engaged with the International Monetary Fund (IMF), entering agreements that mandated austerity measures and subsidy cuts to address fiscal deficits and stabilize its economy. These agreements, though intended to improve financial stability, often triggered public backlash, resulting in protests and political instability. The IMF's early agreements with Pakistan included structural adjustment programs that saw key goods subsidies slashed and the national currency devalued. The rise in the cost of essential commodities significantly impacted low-income groups, sparking widespread unrest. Under President Pervez Musharraf, Pakistan secured nearly $2 billion in IMF loans, but austerity policies, including reduced government spending and further subsidy cuts, only worsened conditions for citizens. The public's frustration was amplified by rising inflation and unemployment, leading to massive protests. Some argue that these reforms are vital for long-term fiscal health, while others contend that the austerity measures exacerbate the nation's economic challenges. Kenya, too, faced similar issues in the 1990s when it implemented IMF-backed structural adjustment programs. These measures, designed to address fiscal deficits and slow economic growth, required Kenya to privatize state-owned enterprises and reduce public spending. By 1995, Kenya had sold over 100 government-owned entities, including key assets like Kenya Airways and Kenya Commercial Bank. However, the anticipated economic recovery did not materialize, as the country recorded stagnant GDP growth and a 3.9% decline in agricultural output. The cuts to critical sectors like health and education resulted in the introduction of user fees, making previously affordable services out of reach for many Kenyans. This led to significant public dissatisfaction and protests, as many citizens felt the IMF's prescribed solutions did not fit Kenya's unique challenges. Critics argue that rapid privatization and austerity, without sufficient safety nets, exacerbated unemployment and poverty, while market liberalization created opportunities for corruption and market failures. The IMF's approach has come under increasing scrutiny, particularly from countries in the global south. These nations argue that the IMF's structural adjustment programs, which emphasize austerity, privatization, and trade liberalization, often lead to adverse outcomes, such as reduced public spending on essential services, increased vulnerability to global market fluctuations, and rising poverty. Critics also highlight the erosion of national sovereignty, as the IMF's loan conditions often force countries to adopt policies that may not align with their unique economic and social contexts. The IMF's governance structure, which favors wealthier countries, further fuels dissatisfaction, as decisions may not reflect the interests of poorer nations. In response to these concerns, BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have sought to reduce their reliance on IMF-led financial mechanisms. Established in 2015, the New Development Bank, NDB, aims to provide alternative financing for infrastructure and sustainable development projects within BRICS countries and other emerging economies. With an initial capital of $100 billion, the NDB offers loans without the stringent conditions typically associated with the IMF, giving member countries more flexibility in pursuing their development goals. The Contingent Reserve Arrangement, CRA, also launched in 2015, provides a financial safety net for BRICS nations, offering liquidity support in times of economic pressure. In October 2024, during the 16th BRICS Summit in Kazan, Russia, member countries discussed several initiatives to reduce their dependence on Western-dominated financial systems. One such initiative, proposed by Russian President Vladimir Putin, involves the creation of the BRICS Grain Exchange, designed to stabilize food prices and enhance food security among member nations. While this proposal has gained support, experts believe that developing such an exchange will require considerable time and effort. Additionally, BRICS leaders endorsed a common cross-border payment system, which includes the development of BRICS Pay, a decentralized payment system that enables transactions in local currencies, aiming to reduce reliance on the US dollar and promote greater financial sovereignty. This shift away from Western-dominated financial structures is a key part of the BRICS nations' efforts to create a more balanced international monetary system that prioritizes their own economic interests and development needs. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it insightful or inspiring, please like and subscribe to stay connected with our community. Your support is incredibly valuable. Feel free to check out another video on our channel.